Hey, welcome back to another Goosebumps review. Today, as promised in the last video, we are taking a look at Slappy's Nightmare. Now, this is a book that I had heard quite a bit about. I had heard in a lot of other reviews on this book that it was really good, but the ending ruined it. So I was going into this book with that mindset. Like, I was still keeping an open mind, but I was keeping in mind what other people had said about this book, and that was pretty much the consensus among a lot of people. So I was keeping that in the back of my head as I was reading this book. And is it true? Well, I suppose that's what we're going to find out. Our story begins, once again, with Jimmy O. James doing another show with Slappy, and this one goes horribly wrong as well, with Slappy biting a kid's ear and making a high-pitched noise. So when this happens, there's a couple chapters during this scene. The tension and the terror is really palpable here. It's written very well. I've never felt the pain that Slappy has induced on other people before until this moment. This was the moment where I really felt like Slappy was actually hurting someone, right? Because the book describes like Slappy bites this kid's ear, and the book describes it like there's a crunch sound that echoes through the theater as Slappy bites this kid's ear, and it's a pretty intense scene. So after the show, Jimmy takes Slappy backstage in a fit of rage, and they exchange a couple blows, they fight with each other, and of course some insults. And after all that, Jimmy reveals that he has a replacement for Slappy. Slappy's done, he says. Slappy doesn't believe him until he brings out a dummy named Wally, who looks pretty much exactly like Slappy. The anger in the air is very palpable. You know, Jimmy as soon as Jimmy enters the green room, he kicks Slappy across the room, and then he starts punching him a little bit. And even Slappy gets upset when Jimmy reveals that he has a replacement for him, and Slappy tries to take off his head. It's another pretty intense couple scenes we have here in the beginning. Just as Jimmy is about to replace Slappy, Slappy gives up and begs for his life, realizing that Jimmy is not joking. So Jimmy decides to give him one final chance by forcing Slappy to do 3 good deeds, or else he's really done for good. After that, Jimmy gives Slappy to a fan named Georgia. Once at Georgia's house, Slappy decides to get to his first deed by cleaning up her messy room, because Georgia's mom came in earlier and chastised her for not having it cleaned up, and if she didn't clean it up, she wasn't going to be able to go to a birthday party. So Slappy cleans the messy room, but the next morning, he suddenly finds the room in an even larger scale of disrepair. There's a huge paint blob on the rug, there's a bunch of things just messed up. He's pretty upset to see that his work was ruined as soon as he got to it. And as Georgia and her sister Stella argue, there's a pretty good sense of tension and despair. As we go through the story, we're going to see that Georgia's family is a bit of a broken family. Their dad is no longer in the picture, and Georgia's mom seems to think that Stella is kind of crazy and she's a bit of a problem child. And there's just a lot of arguing and shouting in the house in general. The next day, Georgia decides to perform for a wheelchair-bound girl named Maggie with Slappy to cheer her up. So Slappy goes along with the performance as his real first good deed this time. But it's soon ruined when Maggie's wheelchair suddenly starts rolling down the hill towards a speeding van. She isn't hit, but she does happen to fall out of the wheelchair and break her arm. Usually scenes like this don't get me, because R.L. Stine likes to do his stinger scares, right? Where like in the first chapter, like things are going as normal, and then someone, I don't know, cuts their own arm off, and it's like whoa, but it's like, and then they're like, haha, just kidding. Like R.L. Stine does it quite a lot, and there's also these kind of scenes that happen in several books too, where someone will be like put in a situation where a car is going towards them, but nothing happens. And I did think this was going to be one of those scenes. And it kind of was, but there was also the added question of me wondering if Slappy was going to step in and save the day. Because, he has to do his good deeds, right? That was going through my mind as I was reading this. The next day, Georgia goes to babysit a young boy named Robbie and brings Slappy, hoping to entertain him. And Robbie is like this 2-year-old boy. When Georgia shows Slappy to him, he's all like, "No, I don't like Slappy. I don't want him around." So Georgia's just like, "All right, whatever," and leaves Slappy in a different room. However, in the middle of the night, Robbie starts crying, and Slappy, realizing that George is asleep, he's the only one who can help Robbie. So Slappy goes up to Robbie's room and finds his little blanket tied around his neck. So Slappy saves Robbie, lulls him back to sleep, and returns downstairs, back to the couch he was placed on. However, the next morning, Robbie's parents return home only to find him hanging from the drapes. I'm not sure exactly what they mean by this. But they say he was hung from the drapes. I assume not like hanged from the drapes. I assume like just tied around them, I guess. I mean, I'm not sure. But he was hung from the drapes, as they say. And he is okay. However, there is one clue left in the house as to who possibly could have done this, because Georgia denies it. She was asleep. There are muddy footprints on the ground. There is a mystery that has been perpetuating throughout the story of who is ruining Slappy's good deeds. Is it Slappy himself? Is it the sister Stella, because Stella has been a bit of a brat this whole story? Or is it Jimmy O. James, because earlier in the story Jimmy O. James said he was going to be watching Slappy, and maybe Jimmy O. James just wants Slappy dead, just to get rid of him. That night, Slappy has had enough of Stella, who he believes is ruining his good deeds, so he goes to her room to kill her. But she takes a picture of him on the bed, setting up a trap for Slappy because she knows Slappy is actually alive. They have a short fight before Mom and Georgia enter the room. Stella shows the picture, but still, no one believes her that Slappy is alive. The dynamic between Slappy and Stella is pretty interesting. I don't think Slappy has ever feared a kid more than Stella. Throughout this whole book, he's been hating Stella for ruining his good deeds, and there's actually something on the line this time because Slappy will actually die if he doesn't get through these good deeds. Stella is his biggest enemy, and Stella actually does put up a decent fight with Slappy. She is kind of an interesting character. The next day at school, Georgia brings Slappy to lunch to perform with him, because I guess their school has like these lunchtime performance things. But during the performance, Slappy sees Stella stalking him in the kitchen, so he gets up himself and runs back there, only to find out that dressed in Stella's clothes is Wally, the dummy that he was going to be replaced with. It's been him ruining these good deeds the entire time. He was the one that trashed George's room again. He was the one that pushed Maggie's wheelchair down the hill, and he was the one that hung Robbie from the drapes. I'm not gonna lie when I say I wasn't fully expecting this twist. I had completely forgotten about Wally at this point. That being said, Slappy and Wally fight for a while before Georgia interjects and throws both of them into a trash compactor in the lunchroom. It's then that Slappy wakes up. It was all a dream. And happy to be alive, he wakes up in Jimmy's green room, and Jimmy declares that Slappy's time is up because he's just received a delivery. It's a crate. And inside the crate is Slappy's twin with the same yellow papers that will put a curse on him to force him to do these good deeds or else he's done for. And that's the big twist of the book. So, what did I think about this book? Well, honestly, this is one of the better Night of the Living Dummy books, as people has said. It has a very unique premise, with Slappy having to do good instead of evil. And there were a lot of other unique things as well, like Stella, who is not the main protagonist of the book, trying to prove that Slappy was alive and evil, and the vitriolic hate that Slappy had for Stella. There were a lot of tense and almost depressing moments in this book, and they were all written very well. It was nice to see things from Slappy's perspective for once, because for most of the story, you're following Slappy. And much like people have said that the final twist ruins the book for them, I'm going to be honest, the final twist doesn't really ruin the story for me. Because, the book is called Slappy's Nightmare. I guess it's kind of par for the course that he would have an actual nightmare. Slappy being defeated is not something we normally see. I could see how people wouldn't like the twist of it being a dream. But the thing that saves it for me is Jimmy getting the delivery of a dummy that looks exactly like him and the same yellow papers with the curse on it saying that, and the final line of the book is actually Jimmy saying sometimes dreams do come true. I mean, it's the ending is kind of implying that Slappy's going to have to do it anyways. It's not going to be the same exact scenario we saw in the book, but it will be something like that. I can't be mad about that. It does make me wonder, however, if Slappy made it out of it or not. So where does it fall within my ranking? Well, this was one of the Night of the Living Dummy books that I really did enjoy for a change. I don't really tend to like these books too much because they tend to be pretty samey. Once you've read one, you've pretty much read them all. So I can appreciate a Night of the Living Dummy book that does something different for a change. And this was definitely one of those. I don't know if I'd give it an S tier. I don't think it was that good. I was enjoying it. It did have some fun moments. So I'm going to give Slappy's Nightmare an A tier. Well, that's all I got for you tonight. The next Goosebumps book we're going to be covering, we're going to be sticking with Series 2000 a lot, is Jekyll and Hyde. So that is the next Goosebumps book we will be covering. I hope you enjoyed my review of Series 2000, number 23, Slappy's Nightmare. I'm actually pretty glad I did this one next because it kind of tied in with Bride of the Living Dummy. Having both stories, having Jimmy O. James. It was kind of cool that it worked out like that. But anyways, next book, Jekyll and Hyde. I hope you enjoyed this review. See you next time.